Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm talking today about Islamic wills. And it's a topic that, of course, is so well defined in Islam, and most people know about it. However, I realized by questions that I've been asked, my child did something to offend me. Can I cut them out of my will? I have a child who's not a Muslim. Can I leave anything to them in my will? And so many such questions have come up, and that caused us to research and to come up with some of the issues surrounding Islamic wills that we think would be useful for you to know about. And it's such a fundamental aspect of Islam, and is one of the most detailed areas that are covered in the Quran. As you know, the Islamic inheritance system is mandatory, and as Muslims we have no right but to no choice rather than to abide by it. Verses 4 of the Quran from 11, chapter 4 of the Quran from verses 11 to 14 outline some of the areas of will writing and inheritance in Islam. If a Muslim lives in a non-Muslim country, it becomes quite important for you to write a will stating that your estate should be distributed according to the Sharia. But even if you live in a Muslim state or an Islamic state, it's also important and recommended by scholars to write a will. And this is also supported by a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which says, reported by Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, to have said, "It is the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequeath, not to let 2 nights pass without writing a will about it." Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu then noted, "Not even 1 night has passed me ever since I heard this from the Prophet ﷺ without my having my will with me." And this is related by Bukhari and Muslim. Where you may wonder, since the issues and the rules of wills are so clearly defined in the Quran, why are we then recommended to write a will? I think it's instructive to establish 2 principles in Islam. One is the principle of private ownership, and the other is looking at the components of wills in Islam, because it's made up of a few different factors. In terms of private ownership, in Islam, man actually owns nothing. Allah owns everything. However, when man is on earth, Allah has ascribed to each man and woman their portion for them to use on earth. And they are trustees of this portion of wealth or assets that they own while living. Upon the death of a Muslim, Allah has told us how He wants us to distribute that wealth, and that's outlined in the Quran. However, Allah in His mercy has done us the favor of allowing us discretion over 1/3 of our will. And we as Muslims are allowed to distribute this 1/3 as we wish. And this in an Islamic state is what they actually talk about when they talk about Islamic wills, because the other portion, the 2/3, is very, very clearly spelled out how it's supposed to be distributed. But this 1/3 we have discretion over, and it's known as the wasiyah. In confirmation of this meaning, a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr, said, "God made charity to you by allowing you to freely dispose of 1/3 of your estate through wasiyah, so that you may gain more reward." And it's important to also note that last bit, so that you may gain more reward. The remaining 2/3 of the estate must be distributed as prescribed in the Quran. And when we talk about an Islamic will, we're talking about the 1/3 bequest, voluntary bequest portion known as the wasiyah. The remaining 2/3 portion is known as the mawarith. And this is a standard formula of Islamic distribution of wealth, depending on the number and type of heirs that survive the deceased. And this is when we talk about your daughter gets this much, your son gets this much, your wife, your husband, your parents, and so on and so forth. And all this is very mandatory and spelt out. Let's look at some of the conditions for writing a will. The first is that the testator, or the writer of the will, must be an adult, first of all, must be of sound mind, must also be acting voluntarily and not under duress. And the will should also be witnessed by at least 2 people of good standing. There is also consensus amongst the scholars that before any payments or bequests are made out of a will, all the obligations and debts of the deceased should have been paid first. These include funeral expenses, administrative expenses, even legal and religious debts, such as unpaid zakat. And then subsequent to that, whatever is left can then be distributed. The mawarith, or the compulsory portion, 2/3 of the estate, like I said, is mandatory and cannot fall below 2/3 of your estate. Those eligible to inherit from this mandatory portion are known as legal heirs or share-taking heirs. They are mentioned explicitly in the Quran. It's actually forbidden to write a will excluding any of these share-taking heirs from your will. So if a child offends you, you cannot write them out of your will, unless, of course, they're a non-Muslim, and that falls under a different category. It's also forbidden, expressly forbidden, to increase the amount of any share-taking heir above what is prescribed in the Quran by topping them up out of the wasiyah, for example. Just as it is forbidden to reduce the amount that they are eligible to, it is also forbidden to increase the amount of one particular person amongst your heirs. However, a non-Muslim, regardless of the relation to the deceased, whether it's the wife, whether it's a child, or so on, is not eligible to inherit out of the mawarith, the 2/3. And the only share that can be given to them is out of the 1/3 wasiyah that we talked about, and within that 1/3 limit. This means that you cannot assign to any person who deserves a share of the mawarith any amount of the wasiyah. And those who are in the wasiyah cannot be taking anything out of the mawarith. The Prophet ﷺ prevents any tampering of this distribution by saying in a hadith, "Truly Allah has given to everyone who has a right their due right. Therefore, no bequests may be made to a legal heir," meaning don't increase over the prescribed portion out of the wasiyah. This is reported by Ibn Majah. So just as you cannot increase the share of your wealth given to the legal heirs, also you may not decrease their own share by making the wasiyah or the bequests greater than 1/3. And we have an example again of this in the Sunnah. This is a narrative transmitted by Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu. And he said, "The Prophet came to visit me in the farewell pilgrimage. When I was afflicted with a severe illness, I said to him, 'O Prophet, you see how ill I am. I have property and no heir except one daughter. Should I then give away 2/3 of my property in alms?' He said, 'No.' I said, 'A half then?' He said, 'No.' I then said, 1/3? He replied, 1/3, and 1/3 is much. It is better that you leave your heirs rich than you should leave them destitute, begging from neighbors." And that's related by Buhari and Muslim. So you see that the third portion, 2/3 being to your estate, even if you have one child, then that 2/3, that child is just fortunate, they gain that 2/3 of your estate. On administration, if they find that by some error, the wasiyah or 1/3 portion is actually more than 1/3, then the first thing to do is to go back to the heirs and seek their consent. If they agree, and they have no obligation to agree, then you can reduce their portion such that all the requests of the deceased are met. If they don't agree, then the 1/3 bequests are prorated down so that it does not exceed 1/3. And if the deceased had made the bequests in order of priority, i.e. pay this one first, then this one, then that one, then that one, then those will be paid out until the 1/3 is exhausted. The 1/3 that is subject to the wasiyah, as I said in the initial hadith by Abu Bakr, is meant to gain more reward by doing good to people who do not inherit, or to good causes. For example, you can leave a legacy to a non-Muslim child. We talked about that. They will not inherit out of your estate, the 2/3 of your estate. Or to a non-Muslim wife who is not eligible to inherit out of your 2/3 estate. You can leave them a bequest out of the 1/3. You could also consider a relative who, due to distance from you, may not be eligible out of the 2/3. However, it's also important to think about leaving bequests to good causes. And, Islam recommends this and encourages this, making charitable bequests. And I think this is something that we as an ummah can improve upon. And it's something that the West have done very, very well. The wealthy leave bequests to charity, and these form endowments that live on long after their death. And people like Ford Foundation is a very good example of that, for example. In Islam, where a charitable donation has ongoing benefits, the rewards are even greater, both to the beneficiary and to you, the person making the will, the testator. Why is that? In Muslims, we have a concept called sadaqah jariyah, and that is ongoing sadaqah. And there are only three actions after you have died that continue to earn you reward once you have passed away. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu reported Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam as saying, "When a man dies, his acts come to an end, except for 3: ongoing charity, knowledge from which people continue to benefit, and a righteous child who prays for him. That's reported by Buhari, a Muslim. It's therefore recommended to make requests for projects which have a lasting impact. For example, provision of water, health, education, and income-generating projects like setting up a waqf, an endowment, designed to make the beneficiaries self-sufficient, since the ongoing reward will have benefits both to those you've left it to and also to yourself in the afterlife. Writing a will gives you the opportunity to gain reward by making requests and earning more reward with Allah. It also ensures that your wishes within the limits and the conditions of the 1/3 are carried out. You don't want to leave your heirs and your family and your loved one at a loss when you die. And if they're not taken care of out of the 2/3, there's nothing that anybody can do. In our increasingly secular environment, it's also important to make sure that you stipulate that your will should be, your estate should be distributed according to the Islamic Sharia, so that something else doesn't happen and that you don't have contesting of your will. There's an important issue that I think we should touch upon when talking about wills, and that is a lot of times Muslims get attacked. We are told that wills in Islam are discriminatory, that it discriminates against women. Women are worth half the value of men because you say your daughter gets half the estate of a male child, and so on and so forth. And I think it's an important area full of misconceptions that we can just touch on very, very briefly. I think that I'd like to start from the point that wills in Islam are actually the most comprehensive and pro-women and pro-children of any religion or any state, secular or otherwise, in the world. There's no religion, there's no state that stipulates the rights of a wife in a will, that stipulates the rights of a child in the will, that stipulates the rights of a parent, of a girl child, of a male child. With a typical Western will, nobody has any particular rights. Your husband may die and you may end up taking nothing. Your father may die and you may end up taking nothing. Or your father could write you out of your will. There was a recent case of Leona Helmsley, who's a very well-known owner of hotels in America, in New York. And she recently left a will where she excluded some of her children and left millions of dollars to her cats or her dog or something of that sort. Things like that are not possible in Islam. Each person's rights are protected, particularly women's rights. And this is unique amongst all religions. Until very recently, women's property was transferred to their men upon marriage. But in Islam, a woman can inherit in her own right. Some people say, well, the wife's portion is small, and forgetting that the wife's portion is a portion for herself. Each of her children are ascribed their own portion. So that money is money meant just for herself and her own consumption. Some say, well, women are worth half the value of men because a girl child gets half what a son would get. And there are various things you can use to counter that. The first is that people's responsibilities are different in Islam. With that money comes a certain responsibility, or that inheritance comes a certain responsibility. The girl's portion, again, is purely for herself. The man's portion typically is for him to take care of himself and any of his female relatives that are around him. It's his responsibility to take care of them and his wife, his sisters, and so on. Therefore, his portion is more. And it's also not correct to say that a girl will always inherit less. If there's only a girl child, as I outlined in the hadith, she will inherit everything. If there's two girls, they will share the money equally. And so there are opportunities or the situations where a girl may earn more than a man is only the case where a sister and a brother are there, that a brother will gain more than a sister. But most importantly, before anybody tells you this is discriminatory or this is not discriminatory, they should point to you in their own system where the rights of each person in the family are actually protected and spelt out and carried out according to the Sharia. So preparing a will is a useful exercise, and it puts our affairs in order and ensures that our own will is done, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.